On August 3rd, 2020, defendant Therese Poe armed himself with a DPMS AR-15. It's a multi-caliber chamber. You can chamber in a 223 or a 336, and he chambered in a 336, or 356, and that specific caliber of ammunition would be discharged from that rifle on August 3rd, 2020 as well. The magazine would be emptied. Because this incident involves a shooting, and the state is confident that the evidence that we will present in this case will show you that Mr. Poe was one of the individuals in possession of a firearm during the shooting, and he was specifically in possession of this AR-15. Now, the case begins with patrol officers being dispatched to Sherwood. The Sherwood area has a convenience store. It is the Black Lives Matter convenience store, and it's off of Norfolk Boulevard, almost at the intersection of Portsmouth. And that's really where the shooting is going to occur. Even though today you're going to hear from Patrol Officer CG, and he is going to be one of the lead patrol officers to respond. And he's going to tell you about how he was dispatched to a shooting that he was given information by dispatch led to believe happened at the store. It didn't happen at the store. You'll hear about how he would go into the store, inquire if a shooting had happened. No individuals were willing to cooperate. There was confirmation that a shooting had occurred, though, but it was actually a woman driving in an SUV. And you're going to see body-worn camera today of this. She's going to pull up in the parking lot, and she's going to flag the patrol officer and say, "I hear yelling." Because in the course of this shooting, the defendant gets shot, and so he is hiding in a field. The patrol officers, they run from the convenience store, they run down the sidewalk, and they have to go around a fence line. But what they just ran past is the AR-15. Okay, they find the defendant in the field. They, turn him around. I want you to pay attention to some of the details of that body-worn camera. But they're going to turn around. He's going to confirm he's shot in the leg, the left leg. And that left shoe is going to be left behind in the field for detectives to collect. He is going to be treated by rescue, and the investigation is going to go underway. And you're going to hear about the individuals who conducted the investigation and everything they did to piece together what we're here for today, which is one charge of possession of a firearm as a juvenile delinquent. Now, I anticipate His Honor is going to tell you that involves 3 elements. 1, that he had, in fact, committed a crime that would have been considered a felony if he had been an adult. Okay, and therefore he was a juvenile delinquent at the time. 2, that he was under the age of 24. And 3, that he was in possession of the firearm. And those first 2 elements, you're going to hear right off the bat in the state's case in chief that the parties have stipulated to, and that therefore you should accept as fact that those first 2 elements are, in fact, true. And then you're going to hear evidence from the state about the fact that he was in possession of the AR-15. Now first, you're going to see Mr. H break down the scene with the crime scene detective. There's actually going to be 2 crime scene detectives that you will hear from today, because one of them goes to the hospital and takes photographs and collects evidence, and the other, he'll also be at the scene too. And then the other, Detective S, will be the primary working the scene, and you're going to see what I anticipate being more than 70 photos of that scene. And we're actually going to also show you a simulation of the scene using some of those photos, matching them up in conjunction with the lead detective of this case breaking the scene down for you. Now, some of the more important things that are collected at the scene will include his left shoe, okay, and also the AR-15. Now, the AR-15 is right off the side of the road, right off of Norfolk Avenue, in the grass, such that I anticipate the evidence will show you if a car drove by, it would be right there on the side of the road in the grass. And of course, that rifle is swabbed. And remember that because, of course, I'm going to come back to the fact that the rifle was swabbed. But what else was taken from the scene? Well, casings, right? 5.56 casings that were discharged from this rifle. How can I say that? You're going to hear from several FDLE analysts, and ladies and gentlemen, they have a lot of experience. And ladies and gentlemen, there are certification processes for their labs, and there are supervisors checking their work, and there are protocols that they follow, and they are going to be tendered as experts because that's what their training and experience will show you they are. And when they testify, they are going to testify in their expertise because they are specifically assigned to specific sections of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Laboratory. Now, how will the state be able to show you that these casings, the 5.56s, actually match the AR-15? Well, that's because JSO Detective Officer TP, he will test fire the AR-15. He'll show you the result of the test fire. It will include 2 bullets, 2 projectiles, and they're going to use those items that he used in the actual AR-15 that you will see he's going to use. He's going to actually collect those items so that FDLE can do a scientific analysis and compare them to the casings we collect at the scene. And that analyst is going to tell you that those casings from the test fire, they match the casings from the scene. And that's going to show you that the casings from the scene were fired from this AR-15. Okay, you're also going to hear from Detective J. And Detective J is the lead detective in this case, who again will break down the scene for you and talk about all of the work unpacking what they could of this shooting. And then later on submitting what she needed to submit to FDLE to prove that Mr. Poe was actually in possession of the AR-15. Now, what about the swab of the rifle? What does that tell us? Well, it's interesting because it tells us, I anticipate the evidence will say a lot, because the swab of that AR-15 will come back and he will be a contributor to the swab. But he will be a contributor in such a way that, first of all, the statistic is higher than the population of this earth, that it is the likelihood that he is the actual individual whose DNA is on the swab of the rifle. But what's more, there's STRM mix, and STRM mix is something that FDLE uses to confirm what percentage of the DNA is the defendant's. Okay, you've got a swab and you're seeing DNA markers, and you know we all have the same amount of markers of our DNA, which makes us who we are, the makeup of us. When the analyst MC runs the swab through STR mix, she will testify that it's determined that he's a 100% of the DNA on the swab. And finally, you will hear from Detective, because at the time that the defendant is taken into custody and interviewed for this specific charge, the lead detective has COVID. Detective G will interview him, and what he's going to do is he's going to show the defendant a photograph of the AR-15. And the defendant is going to admit he had seen it that night. And then the detective is going to go a step further. He's going to be like, hey, I'm not saying you shot it, right? He's going to use some interview strategies here you'll see in the interview, downplaying what actually happened in the shooting. But I know that you were in possession of it, right? And the defendant will be like, and he will be like, do you remember how I know that? And the defender offers up himself. My fingerprints are on it. And Detective G will say, no, it's your DNA. Because at that time, by that time, we're in January of 2021 now. This would occur in August of 2020. All of this work had been done. The swabs had been collected. The firearm had been test fired. The casings determined that they matched the AR-15. The DNA work had been done because remember that shoe that he had left behind on the left foot that they collected from the field? He shot in the left leg, so the FDLE analyst was able to develop what they call a secondary sample from blood on the shoe. She was able to get a full DNA profile from that blood. And later, FDLE is going to confirm that that is, in fact, the defendant's DNA, because there will be a sample of the defendant's DNA taken from his mouth. They'll work up the profile on the mouth. They'll compare that profile to what was swabbed, the blood that was swabbed from the shoe. And after working that profile up, they'll determine that those two profiles, a primary, what's considered a primary source of DNA, a mouth swab, and a secondary source, which is swab of a blood of a shoe. Those DNA profiles match. And that will confirm all of the findings, of course, that FDLE had already made regarding the fact that the defendant had been in possession of that AR-15. So at the conclusion of this case, the state is confident that you will find that the only fair and just verdict in this case is that the defendant is guilty of possession of a firearm as a juvenile delinquent. Thank you so much for your time.
Now you've heard the state indicate that on August 3rd, 2020, Mr. Poe armed himself with a Panther AR-15. Well, that video that you're going to see was from body cam footage, the very body cam footage that the state indicated you would be seeing from officers who were dispatched to the scene. Now that the specific body cam footage shows is on August 3rd, 2020, this defendant sitting before you is found lying in a field, shot, a bullet hole in his leg. His leg was broken. He had surgery that morning, I believe, on August 4th, or approximately August 5th, but his leg is broken. He's found in the field. The video shows the dispatch officers going to the defendant, rushing the defendant, actually, because they heard that there was a person in a field. These officers came to the defendant and they touched him. When they touched him, the defendant howls in excruciating pain because the defendant has been shot. Of course, the officers who come to the scene, they do their job. They call paramedics. The paramedics will soon arrive. That is also captured on the video. So the video that the defense intended to play was to show you that on August 3rd, 2020, a fact that you will see, a fact that no one in this courtroom will be able to dispute, is that on August 3rd, 2020, Mr. Poe was shot. That is a fact that no one in the courtroom would disagree with, not the lead detective, not any patrol officer, not anyone who investigated this matter. Mr. Poe was shot and found in a shot by police officers on August 3rd, 2020. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we just mentioned the lead detective. The lead detective was referred to as Detective J, and I want you to pay attention to Detective J throughout this case. Detective J. Detective J. Remember that name. I also want you to remember and ask yourself, when do the ends justify the means? Well, according to all of you yesterday, if you are a sworn law enforcement officer, the ends never justify the means. At least that's what you all told me yesterday. If any of one of you has a change of heart, you know you're welcome to put that on a note and send it to the bailiff. But according to all of you yesterday, a sworn law enforcement officer is not. With a sworn law enforcement officer, the ends are not supposed to justify the means. Now I have my, and you saw my board, I have my WTF scoreboard. Now I'm sure all of you know what WTF stands for. Where are the facts? That's what I thought it stood for. Where are the facts? Now at least 7 times during the state's opening, I noted and asked myself and wondered to the jury, WTF, where are the facts? Now on August 3rd, 2020, Mr. Poe armed himself. That will at least be one of the facts for you to consider. The issue to consider is, well, there are some certain stipulations. And throughout this certain stipulations, we have attempted to make this matter very simple. This matter doesn't boil down to one thing. Did Mr. Poe, the defendant, have in his possession, custody, or control a firearm? If you believe the state has proven that, their case beyond a reasonable doubt, that Mr. Poe, the defendant, had in his possession, custody, and control a firearm, well, then, I think you know what your duty is to do. However, if the state has not proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt, and there are questions that you have as to the legitimacy of the investigation, the legitimacy of any testing, the legitimacy of if Mr. Poe had a firearm in his possession, custody, or control, well then, you also have a civic duty, and that would be to acquit Mr. Poe. So I ask you to bring that back. WTF? Where are the facts? And what are the facts? Because in this situation, this specific case, we all know the fact. The truth is resolute. It does not change. But as the case goes on, in the testimony you will see and you will hear changes in testimony. You will hear things that are printed on a document one way and then later described another way. Why is that? Ask yourself, why is that? Because again, the truth is resolute. The truth does not change. The truth does not change, and especially not being able to change and should not change when we all know the ends do not justify the means. Ladies and gentlemen, we again have tried to simplify this. We've left one element for the jury to determine. It's the defense to position that as the facts are presented to you, you will see there is doubt as to one element. Not only is there as to one element, you will also see that the unequivocal, undisputed fact of the matter is Mr. Poe was a victim on August 3rd. Mr. Poe was shot. Mr. Poe was found in a field, and Mr. Poe had a bullet hole and a broken leg as a result of being shot on August 3rd, 2020. Thank you.